Hey everyone, and welcome to Besen's AI webinar series. My name is Jaden Kerr, a senior software engineer here at Besent, and I'll be your host for the next 7 weeks. Thanks for joining us as we explore the ever-evolving world of AI. In this series, we'll dive into what's possible today, what's coming next, and how to navigate AI responsibly. Each session, we look at real-world use cases, practical frameworks, and expert insights to help you move forward with confidence. Today's session will examine how enterprises can move from early-stage experimentation to deploying agentic AI systems using cloud-native platforms. We'll discuss architectural patterns for orchestrating foundational models, managing multi-step agent behavior, integrating with enterprise APIs and data sources, ensuring security, safety, and operational governance and risk management within cloud environments. The session will also cover practical deployment considerations, including cost control, performance management, and platform selection trade-offs. Here's this week's speaker, Lachlan Wright, Microsoft Practice Director, on his talk, Enterprise Ready Agentic AI. Take it away, Lachlan.
Thanks, Jaden. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining me, everyone. Excited to have everyone here. If you give me one moment, I'll get the slides up so that we can start cracking through. Like Jaden said, going to be talking about agentic AI, but in an enterprise context. So one of the things that's really exciting about agentic and generative AI is the possibilities and the things that it can do for us personally, but also what can it do for businesses and for enterprises. However, there are a lot more challenges and a lot more complexities in being able to deploy and use generative and agentic AI solutions in an enterprise context. So what we wanted to do is give you some insights into the things that you can do, some frameworks, some ideas, some processes, and things like that that can help you take your agentic and generative AI solutions from proofs of concepts and proofs of value all the way through to production, so you can get those measurable, those impacts, that return on investment, and really win with generative and agentic AI. We do have quite a bit of content to get through, but I'll do my level best to leave some time at the end for some questions. If we don't, feel free to drop them in the chat as we go along. If I can answer them at the end, I will. If not, we'll get back to you following the webinar, and I'll get all your questions answered as quickly as I can. So to start with, what are some of the challenges, right, that you face as an enterprise trying to adopt generative and agentic AI? There's a couple of things there that we'll go through in a minute, but there are some really interesting statistics that come out of McKinsey and MIT and some of the reports they've done that tell a fairly intriguing narrative around where things are kind of going wrong from an enterprise perspective. So 78% of companies report using Gen AI in at least one business function, and that's up from 55% only 12 months ago. So the adoption is certainly increasing. But despite that, more than 80% of companies say that Gen AI has made no material contribution to earnings. And so the numbers and the things that your exec team and your board are looking at, they're not seeing it kind of connect and flow through to the things that matter to them. And interestingly, that doesn't seem to be driven by model quality or regulation, so those kind of technical or some of those factors, but more by your approach. So how are you using these things? How are you extracting the value from them? How are you measuring them? Those kinds of things. And so that's what we want to arm you with today is how do you get the right approach to agentic and generative AI so that the value flows through to the things that matter to your business, your people, your customers, and anyone else in the ecosystem around your organization. So some of the things we see, lots of pilots. I think everyone gets to test and play with things, but very hard to get to production. And we've touched on that a bit, and that's kind of what we see. And so some of the things that lead to that, budgets are always going to favor the kind of the top line, the really high visible stuff. So that's why it's always talk about marketing or contact center and customer experience and those kinds of things, that customer facing stuff. But that's also the hardest place to do some of these things, right? It's a lot more risk, a lot of brand and reputation to think about when you're putting agentic and generative AI solutions in front of your customers, and not so much thought about where you could use that internally in your own workflows and processes that can drive some real value really quickly. So some considerations around where that's being kind of focused. The other one's an imbalance between what we're calling horizontal and vertical use cases. And I'll touch on that in a bit more detail in a moment. But it's about whether you're doing something, using an off-the-shelf kind of generic tool, or building something that's more vertically focused, domain specific to your business, your organization, and your industry. And you get a lot more value in that case. The flip side of that is that often requires, some very specific skill sets. You've got to build stuff yourself, and it takes some very specific skills and capacity to go and do those things as well. It's a little bit harder to get done than to be buying and implementing tools off the shelf. One of the other big blockers we're seeing is around the data quality and accessibility gaps. So people having access to the right data that's clean, ready to go. It's in that gold tier of the medallion architecture. It's all well governed. All the right stuff is there for them to be trusted and allowed to use that stuff in a way that is super effective. So making sure you've got that foundation right is really important. Things are quite disconnected across enterprises. So you've got people doing different pilots and spending their money in different business units with different P&L accountability. And that kind of means that you see the bar move a little bit across instead of stacking that up for really big impact for the entire organization. So bringing that together under a holistic approach is going to be really important. There's always some governance and trust issues with AI. So a lot of people wonder, how do I actually stay on top of this thing? How do I govern its use? How do I make sure that it's working well and working for me and not against me? And there's always the trust issues. There's a big shift from something that's deterministic to something that's probabilistic. And so you kind of get this shift in thinking from software was always logical, something goes in, something happens, and the output's consistent, to something that can be a little bit more unpredictable. And so what we'll talk through today is how you can put the right controls and mechanisms in place to build that trust and keep an eye on your agentic solutions. The last one's always a little bit of cultural resistance and some inertia to overcome. There are concerns that people have around what agentic and generative AI means for society, what it means for their jobs. And so being able to kind of tackle some of those misconceptions and things to give people the confidence to use the tools and have faith in why it's being done as well. So one of the things we wanted to touch on a little bit about what horizontal and vertical AI mean in the context of generative and agentic. So generative AI, everyone's heard a little bit about it. It creates content is the easiest way to explain it. Outputs text, images, things like that. Agentic AI is where that now starts to take action and make some decisions on its own. When you overlay that with either a kind of horizontal general purpose perspective or a vertical, more domain specific industry tuned perspective, you get different results. And so you can see the arrow kind of ticking up from the bottom left to the top right. It's not to mean that that bottom left isn't of value. It certainly is. There's really great value in those tools and the things that sit in that space. But you get more value the further towards the top right you go. And so what we want to do is help people get from that generative horizontal quadrant, start moving towards the others that can provide them some more value, more impact for their business. So those horizontal generative tools like Copilot, Gemini, Claude Teams and Enterprise, those kinds of things, really good for some quick productivity wins and gains for people. But they're very generic and they don't take any action on their own. If you start moving up towards that vertical and you start building some fine-tuned models or augmenting your models with some of your own data and industry data to start doing specific things like clinical notes, safety summaries, tender responses, financial analysis, already you start to see a bit of an uptick in value. Moving towards the right-hand side, if we take the horizontal, but start stepping into agentic, you get things that are pretty generic, but can start taking some action. So they might be able to manage your calendar, go and book some travel for you. Research is a really big one. Analyst agents are really common, those kinds of things. And that's providing them more value as well as stepping into the right space. But nothing compares when you've got something that's domain specific, built around your business and agentic. So you're talking about domain tuned things that can plan and execute actions inside a specialized workflow in your organization. So that could be, submitting claims, dispatching technicians. We see a lot of stuff around supply chain, claims processing is huge, those kinds of things. And that's where you really start to have the impact. There was actually a really interesting story lately, came out recently where OpenAI partnered with a bioscience firm and they built a model they're calling GPT-4B Micro. What it's doing is there's these things called the Yamanaka factors, and basically they're proteins that kind of determine how a cell works and behaves, and they can tweak and adjust these to make these cells move back towards being stem cells, so they can be a bit more flexible in what they do. It's basically anti-aging. But the process for doing this research was taking ages, and there's more permutations to calculate than there are atoms in the universe. And so there's no way for us to get through that. With this model and the work that OpenAI and Retro Biosciences have done, they've found that there's a 50-fold increase in the expressions they need to see from the original factors that are much more efficient at getting this process to work. And so they've gone and taken the timeline. They used to say this is about 20 years away. They're now saying we're about 10 and increasing all the time just by having something a bit more specific and tailored. So the impact is truly remarkable. One of the things we wanted to cover off is what this looks like from an architectural perspective. So there's a bunch of different patterns. I've got a list of about 2025 that we kind of use and lean on. We'll cover kind of 3 today just to give you an idea around how some of these things can be strung together to get you the outcome or output you're after. The other thing to think about with these is you can combine them as well. So we'll cover a bit of that too. So I'll start with the reflection pattern. if you've used ChatGPT or any other kind of chat agent, you've probably found that sometimes it comes back with something that's maybe incorrect or a bit of a hallucination or not quite what you were after. And you've got to go back and give it that feedback and let it adjust. Well, what you can do is get an agent to do that work for you. So you can have a separate agent review the homework of the first one, and go provide some feedback, and you can let that loop iterate a few times. You can set your own factors for when that exit is finished, and then your outcome comes back out, and automatically you've got a much better kind of response at the end. The planning pattern, so you take a bunch of tasks that could be from a person. It might have come out of another system. There's another version of this called a bit of an environment pattern, and that's where you're taking inputs from sensors and IoT and data like that, and an agent's automatically taking action based on those. So that task list could be generated however you want. We're focusing on people here because I think one of the things that is really important is that you've got to keep a human in the loop in a lot of use cases still. It's not quite there where a lot of things can run off on their own. You can be comfortable from an enterprise perspective. So keeping a human in the loop is really important. The agent takes that task list, performs the action, goes, cool, am I done here or not? I'm done, beautiful, finish that off, publish my output and move on to the next thing. Where you can start talking about combining those things, you could see if you took the reflection pattern and almost plug that into where that agent is executing the task, you can pick the task up, have a few cracks, review its homework a bit, and then come back with a better outcome on each one. So you can see how these things kind of stack together to add more value. One that's really important to think about is multi-agent. So much like people, if you give an agent a really broad remit and it's not very focused, the result's probably not going to be that great. You really want to get them focused on something, make it specific. You want specialists, not generalists. That's where you start to get that value. Like we said, we want to be more vertical, domain specific, and the more specific you get with those agents, the better. Much like people, right? You develop a skill set, you're very good at something in particular, but you work in a team to bring your skills together to get the right outcome. And so that's what we're seeing from an agent perspective. You've got an orchestrator or a manager over the top, and agents that work to perform different parts of the functions that need to be done to get the outcome. And this is where things like agent-to-agent protocol become really important in allowing these to communicate in a way that's consistent across your enterprise. Wanted to talk about some of the things that we build this with. So the popular models we're seeing, a lot of OpenAI, Anthropic Claude, incredibly popular, Gemini, of course. Meta's Llama model is very popular from an open source perspective. From a platform perspective, the hyperscalers are a no-brainer. They provide heaps of value from an enterprise perspective, and having that support, that kind of platform layer for you to build on that you don't have to worry about, and a bit of consistency as well. So having something that doesn't change as often as the industry is changing provides you some reliability and something you can depend and count on. Pardon me. In an area that's moving and changing quite rapidly is very important. And so those hyperscalers, as well as the data platforms around Snowflake and Databricks, have some really good capability and offerings in that space that make it much easier to work with agentic solutions from an enterprise perspective. And there are endless tools to work with. Lane chain obviously being a big popular one. Some of the really well-known monitoring solutions have added capability to support monitor. Agentic and generative AI solutions, really important. We'll touch on some of that in a minute. But then AutoGen, things like Pro AI that help you build those patterns that we spoke about above and a bunch of others. They provide a framework from a software perspective to let you build that much quicker and more consistently. And that's really important, right? Being able to enable your teams to do this quickly and easily is really key. And we'll touch on that in a sec. So what does it look like, and how do I kind of go from, great, I've got an idea for an agentic or generative solution, how do I get to prod? And so that first step is going to be about the opportunity and planning. So what is this thing? What's it going to be? But really importantly, what does success and good look like? And the Amazon approach, write the press release and work back is really good here. Some of those kinds of things, setting smart goals, that kind of stuff, to work out what am I going to do? What are the KPIs and measures that mean that this is a winner and that I'm going to back it? And if I find that it's not, being able to accept that quickly, fail fast, and move on is really important. So having a low cost, low barrier to entryway with a platform and some process to be able to enable people to test and build and try these things out is really important. If they can't even try it out or get their ideas going, you're going to have a really hard time finding the killer use case in your organization. So we come up with what that solution looks like, get into a proof of concept or a proof of value as quickly as possible. You don't want that opportunity and planning phase to take more than maybe a day or two tops. You want to get through that really, really quickly and get into that proof of value, start to build the thing out. It doesn't have to be perfect, but very quickly kind of measures this looking like it's got traction. And if you're confident that it does, get it in front of the people who would use it and get their feedback as quickly as possible. There's two reasons for that. One is their feedback is going to be priceless to you if they're the ones using it. they'll be able to tell you what they really need. But the second part is their involvement early on gives them a lot more comfort and confidence when it comes to using this what you build later on. They'll be a lot more comfortable and confident with it when they actually get it in their hands. And so if you go through all that and you find that this is something that's got a lot of legs, we can build it, technically ticks all the right boxes, it's got value, let's go and get this deployed. Step into architecting it more for that scale, safety and security. How do I get this ready and set up for production and get that built and start deploying into a bit more of a controlled non-prod environment? Testing is everything, and I'll touch on it so much during this. Evals and testing and monitoring are super important. That's how you start building trust in these things. So make sure you're testing, you're doing all your assurance, you've got your safety mechanisms and controls in place to make sure you're keeping the nasty stuff out of the responses, and then get your deployments done. And then, like I said, really, really important is that monitor and iterate. So make sure you've got your monitoring in place. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute, but make sure you can keep an eye on what's going on, and make sure you keep an eye on what's going on in production. One of the things that's a little different around some of the agentic AI stuff is that we don't build in a kind of staging environment that we know is an exact replica of prod. And when we copy it over, it's going to do the same thing. There's a lot more room for movement. And so there's no reason you can't monitor using evals and some of the monitoring tools in production without impacting your prod instance. So from maybe a little bit of cost impact, but it gives you a lot more confidence knowing that you're testing the exact same thing that your users are using. So really important there, capture that feedback and be sure to iterate and build on it. So how do I get to a point where people trust this thing that I've built? The first one's the big one, and that's evaluations, or evals for short. Evals are kind of like the unit testing of the AI world. So structured tests, they look at something, there's a, you go and you design your scenarios, run them through, capture the output, and then measure the output against what you said was meant to be there. So it can look at things like accuracy, groundedness, efficiency, goal completion. Is it meeting the preferences of a person? So is it thinking about what a human would want, not just what a model would want? Really, really important, and a bunch of things to think about there. And so what you want to start with is, what are my evaluation goals? What are the things that I need to kind of test for and cover? It's important to be diverse there. So don't just think about, I only care about groundedness and accuracy. Think about, is the response, the right tone? Is it grounded in data that I can trust and be confident that it's giving me the right response? Some of those kinds of things are really important as well. So get those test cases designed, run your agent against those test cases, capture your outputs. Some tricks to that, you can use AI to generate a bucket of evals. So you can kind of get it doing it itself, as well as measuring and running the evaluation itself. So it kind of makes that process a lot quicker and easier. Analyze those results, capture them, find what needs to be tweaked, and go ahead and tweak them. The other thing that's really important to do with this is automate it. You don't want this to be something you have to run manually or anything like that. It should happen automatically where there's something that doesn't line up. Raise a ticket, or send someone an email, carry a pigeon, whatever it is. Just make sure that it's happening automatically. It's running on both your prod and non-prod environments, and that feedback's getting back to the team so they can adjust for it. The next really important thing to cover is content safety. So you really want to make sure that the stuff and the response that comes back out of the models isn't harmful. You're not sending anything illegal or nothing violent or misinformation or copyright infringements, those kinds of things. And there's a lot of different tools that do this as well. A lot of the platforms have this stuff built into it, but there's tailored and specific tools as well. And basically what they do is take you can put it on the input side or the output side of the model. Most people focus on the output. So it takes the output that it's got, runs a bit of an analysis over the top of that, make sure that what you're asking or what the response is all okay from depending on the measures that you've put in place, and balances it with a bit of a risk score. So it goes through and says, this is probably tracking a little bit high on maybe the violence side, but nothing else is high, or is it high on this? Is it also misinformation? Where does it land? And then depending on that score, it can go and take action on its own. So if it finds that it's something that is pretty confident not going to be okay, it can go ahead and take the action for you. And you've experienced that with ChatGPT or Copilot, where I said, sorry, I can't do that for you. So some of those things, that's what that looks like. Sometimes it's not really easy to decide whether that is something that should be stopped or not. And so you kind of have to go and break out to a human to review it. What you want to do is then try and make sure that that feedback gets captured, and the next time it comes around, it is addressed automatically, so you can keep relieving the pressure on teams to review these things. But you don't have to build your own. Plenty of tools off the shelf to cover that, but really important to have in place. The last one's monitoring. As with anything, any production kind of tool or software that you're building, you want to be able to monitor and observe it. So this tracks all the usual things around your performance and resource utilization, security, those kinds of things. But some of the other stuff to have a look at, around the behaviors, the explainability, any unintended actions, even measuring things like what your token inputs and outputs are so you can keep an eye on your costs, all that kind of stuff. Latency is really important with some of these as well, depending on the model you're using, especially if you start getting into reasoning and some of those things. So really, really important to cover those off, and make sure that you've got a way to keep an eye on all the different factors of your agentic AI solution, from the infrastructure all the way through to the model. And so the two that I'll kind of talk about, the behavioral stuff, looks at how did the agent get to that answer? And so that might be some of the model, but it may have also used a tool. It may have brought in information from a RAG solution, might have made an API call, could use MCP. So what decisions did it kind of make there? What did it use to get there? The other one's explainability. And so that's kind of, how did it decide to use that tool? What did it then do with the output that it got from there to kind of massage and change it further? And really, how did it get to the end? One of the really interesting things is around some of the transparency scores that kind of say, here's what we think the transparency of that is and how understandable it is to a human. Some of the other stuff is kind of factual analysis. So if I change and tweak some of these things, how different is the response? How consistent is it? Some of those kinds of things. So being able to capture some of that stuff that's really specific to an agentic AI solution is really important. And a lot of monitoring tools are picking up that and providing those features today. We talk about how important the AI governance is in being able to adopt agentic and generative AI in an enterprise context. So we want to talk a little bit about how you actually do that. Step one's always going to be, what the hell does your AI governance framework look like? Right, we've got to define it. There's three kind of key things to that. One's policy. So what are the principles, rules, standards for AI usage in your organization? What's the processes look like? So how do systems get evaluated? How do they get rolled out? Who owns that kind of stuff? All those things, and that leads into people. So who's accountable? Who's got the different responsibilities? And everything from the who's responsible for the stuff that gets deployed and built, but also there's a degree of responsibility for everyone in your organization in terms of how they're using those tools. And so making that really clear to people about what can and can't go in and how they need to think about using AI in their day-to-day job is really important. So next step in that, getting an AI governance board in place. A lot of people often think about, cool, I get someone from IT, get an exec sponsor, something like that, I'm kind of in the right place. You really need to get a diverse set of people from across the business into this governance board to kind of bring all the different important perspectives together. So you need someone from IT and from your technology part. Of course, you need someone from an exec sponsor perspective, but you're going to need someone from finance around costs. You're going to need someone from P&C to think about the people impact and the concerns that people might have, risk, compliance, legal. So making sure you've got representation from across the business is really important there. Next step, that board can come up with what the usage policies are for AI at the org. So what can it be used for? Where can't it be used? How do we handle data going in and out of AI? All those kinds of things have to kind of get defined and discovered. And that's really important to setting up that enablement later down the track for people to adopt and build. Next bit is getting that risk assessment process built, really important. Again, helps with the enablement side of things. So what's the data sensitivity here? Are there any regulatory or compliance concerns? What about the reputational risk or operational risk? Who signs off depending on how we rate that risk? And you've probably all got already a risk assessment framework in your organization. Always good to build on that and extend on that. So you're at least grounding it in something that that's already tailored for your org. Once you've got that risk assessment process and you've got the policies in place, then you can start getting the technical guardrails in. So some of the things around, how do I make sure people aren't egressing data? How are we doing identity? How do I make sure the content safety stuff's there? And there's the kind of tool specific view of this. So if I'm deploying something like a Copilot or a Claude Enterprise or something like that, what controls need to be in place from that perspective? But also, if someone's going to build and deploy a solution, what do they need to have for it to be good enough to go to prod? So that's really important. Education and training is crucial from two perspectives. If people don't know how to use the tools that you're either buying or building, they're not going to be very effective. But the other part is, people are quite often afraid of what they don't understand. And so making sure people understand what agentic and generative AI is and how it works will go a long way to making them feel more comfortable with using it and with the organization adopting it. And the last one, as always, monitor, audit, and improve. So keep an eye on how things are happening across the organization from an AI perspective. Work out what good looks like again, and constantly measure and check that it's meeting the needs of the org. Is it slowing things down? Is it accelerating things? Are we getting too kind of relaxed around our compliance? Are we getting too tight? Making sure that you've got all those things in place and you're balancing that as you go is really important. Finally, just wanted to touch on a bit of a summary around what the keys to AI success in enterprise are. And so we've talked about the AI governance, the policy, that kind of stuff. But the next one is really make sure you enable rapid AI proofs of concept and value. people being able to do that stuff quickly, get blockers out of the way. So from a process and technology perspective, maybe you've got a center of excellence to rely on, so you can bring some experts in to help them go and test and try things out really quickly. It's going to be really important. If people can't do that experimentation, then you're limiting your ability to find the killer use case in your org for AI. The next one's, the technology goes so far. We've seen this with cloud and other technologies in the past, but if you don't transform your business and your workflows around it, you're not going to get the most value out of it. So really think about how your organization works, behaves, and what it does, and how you can change it with AI. So start from scratch. What would this look like if I built it with Gen AI? Start from a blank whiteboard and work it out with a group of people from across the org with different perspectives. And you'll find that you very quickly find some very, very cool and interesting ways to apply generative and agentic AI to solve some killer use cases. I spoke about this before, but test, and monitor is really, really important. So if you can't understand and see what's going on, if you aren't running those evals extensively, and I'm talking thousands of data points at least, you're not going to have any confidence that what it's doing is the right thing, and you're going to have a very hard time getting buy-in for us to go to prod. So super important, as well as those safety and security controls. We touched on the data readiness and accessibility being key for people to get that kind of get access to that stuff to be able to build these solutions. Something else that people often overlook, exec sponsorship is good, but leadership as well. So if you are a leader in your organization, I encourage you to make sure that it's visible that you're doing and using these things. Gives a lot of your team more comfort. If you're doing it as well, it kind of shows them a way. And without executive sponsorship, we find that a lot of these things never really get off the ground. So it's super important for these to have the momentum to get to prod. And the last one that we touched on is obviously education and training, both from a skilling perspective, but also to make sure that the team has comfort and confidence in adopting and using Gen AI. The last thing I just wanted to quickly leave you with was the Version Agentic experience. It's a new offering we're bringing to market, really, really exciting. It's only 4 days long, really quick. We get together in person, bring some of your decision makers, subject matter experts, and some of our experts to kind of work out what's some killer use cases for Agentic AI in your org. We talk about some of the things that we think could help. You bring some of your own. We talk about where you are from a readiness perspective. We actually build out a rapid prototype of something that we think would work really well. So we go through what they could be, identify and prioritize, pick something that's high impact, high value, and at the end of those 4 days, you walk away with a proof of concept, as well as a bunch of knowledge and a plan to go and get this stuff done. So, like I said, being able to rapidly test and experiment and try these things is really important, and that's what this is designed to do. So, reach out to the team if you'd be interested in any of that. And with that, I think we're just on time. So my apologies that we didn't have enough for questions, but thank you all for coming today. I'll hand it back to Jaden.
Thanks, Lachlan. And thank you for joining today's session. If you have any questions or follow-ups about today's topics, and we didn't have time for Q&A, you can reach out to Lachlan at the email on the screen. So what's next for this series? We have got 6 weeks to go. Next week is week 5, the 11th of September. Our very own speaker is me, Jaden Kerr, Senior Software Engineer Digital, with my co-host Stoyan Shapov, Solutions Lead of Digital, on our talk, Designing Smarter Prompts with Retrieval Augmented Meta-Prompting. In other upcoming sessions, we'll be diving into topics like AI-powered customer experience, Gen AI use cases in healthcare and operations, and how to build secure, scalable AI systems. So keep an eye on your inbox for these next invites. Thanks again for being part of Ascend's AI webinar series. We look forward to helping you unlock the full potential of AI safely, ethically, and with impact. Have a great day, and we will see you next time.